That's nice. Everyone's nice and quiet. Hello, my name is Kathy Klepfer, and I'm the president of the Board of Trustees for the Palmer Land Trust. We'd like to welcome you here to our annual meeting here at the Ivywad School. We are so happy that everyone came, and we thank you so much for your support. I'd like to start out the program by making a big announcement, one which is a really great honor for Palmer Land Trust. And I'd like to recognize Scott Campbell, who has been awarded the Distinguished Loeb Fellowship at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design. And it's been for the work that he's been spearheading for Palmer Land Trust over the last 7 years. The award is given to 9 individuals around the world, and the fellowship is offered to practitioners who are working in both the built and the natural environment. It's a really big deal. He intends to use his fellowship to further innovate around the groundbreaking work that he has begun at Palmer in all of our work at emerging models for Western water conservation. And this is the area that you'll hear more about tonight, and it's truly innovative and exciting. Scott has been with Palmer Land Trust for 7 years. His leadership has led to the permanent protection of over 25,000 acres of natural and agricultural land and 40,000 acres of conservation projects currently underway. Palmer Land Trust is one of the 25 largest easement holders in the United States and one of only 2 local land trusts in the country that are in this group. That's something that here in southeastern Colorado we should be really, really proud of, because that, Palmer Land Trust is an innovator and a leader across the country in land trusts, and we have a lot of, we're really proud of all of Scott's efforts and all of the great donors, supporters that we have that have enabled us to have this happen. Scott will be leaving our organization at the beginning of June, and we are really excited for him, but he will be really missed. And great things will arise for Scott and our water conservation efforts. He'll be able to use all those amazing resources up at Harvard and the other universities around Cambridge to do some amazing investigation, amazing research, and come up with more solutions that we will hopefully be able to apply here. The trustees had been working on a succession plan over the last year. We didn't know we'd have to implement it so quickly, but we will be announcing in mid-May Scott's successor. We have incredible work in progress and are confident that we will keep the momentum going. And I think once you see what Scott's going to talk about tonight, you'll see how exciting it is and how much momentum there really is going on these projects. So please join me in congratulating Scott for this amazing recognition.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Kathy. And it's amazing how many people I know very well in this room tonight. And 7 years ago, when I stood in front of Palmer gatherings like this, I think I knew maybe 10% of the people who were there. And tonight, I feel very close to about 90% of the people here, and those 10%. I'm sure I would feel close to you if I knew you better. But I know most of you, and you've really enriched my life during these 7 years, and really appreciate the warm wishes. As Kathy's mentioned, the scale of what we are doing today far exceeds what we were doing 7 years ago, and that far exceeds what the organization was doing 37 years ago when it formed. And one of the exciting things for us tonight is we're going to have a presentation that takes us to a really grand scale in looking at the earth and protecting this fragile environment that all life depends on. I'd like to kick it off by providing an update to all of you. Hello, Mr. Coleman. I think we should also, Joe hates to be...
Say Scotty Campbell.
I Just quickly thank Joe for hosting us here. Joe prefers not to be recognized for those who do not know. But obviously our scale has really increased, and we have an exciting presentation from Jeff Ashby tonight that will really, again, expand our horizons in terms of looking at things at scale. But we're going to start off by doing a little bit of that. It's been quite some time since we've had a straight annual meeting for our members and supporters. And so tonight we're going to give you updates on 3 projects, and they're really 3 projects that demonstrate, I think, in very significant ways the landscape scale focus that Palmer has begun to adopt. So I'm going to turn off the lights, and I think we're all loaded and ready to go. Okay, so if we're going to start by talking big, does anybody recognize this property? Since you can't read the name up at the top, it's cut off a little bit. Here's our Banning Lewis Ranch property, and you know, this is a property that Palmer Land Trust has focused on for a long time. When the first effort to develop this property fell through, then Executive Director Stu Dodge, back in 1991, invited the President and the National Director of the Trust for Public Land to Colorado Springs to meet with a citizens group to talk about ways that they might protect large portions of this property, to preserve it in perpetuity, and to help facilitate a more fiscally responsible growth strategy for the city of Colorado Springs by creating a large open space preserve on the city's eastern side. At that point in time, the Banning Lewis Ranch had been annexed into the city of Colorado Springs. You can see that the property runs all up and down the east side of the city. Here we can see Peterson Air Force Base and the airport. Down here is Fountain. This is Big Bluestem Prairie with the Big Johnson Reservoir. Just this little property right here is a 1,300-acre Palmer protected property. So really, when we look at Banning Lewis Ranch, we're talking about immense scale. And the ranch is nearly contiguous with Chico Basin, which many of you are familiar with, which is just to the south. Obviously, we have continued to engage this property over the years, and the more recent engagement around it came after Ultra Petroleum made the announcement that the oil resources on the property were quote-unquote immature, meaning that they really weren't economically feasible to develop at this time. And when that happened, we began meeting with a couple of the directors from the Regional Business Alliance, who also, like Stu Dodge, had concerns about the future of this property and wanted to see it protected, wanted to see a large preserve created, wanted to see our city adopt a fiscally responsible growth strategy. And those meetings a little over a year ago spurred essentially a collaborative group that is working together today. Many of you are here in this room. We've been meeting about once a month or once every other month at the Palmer Land Trust office. It is regional business leaders, it's leading philanthropists in our community, it's military leaders in our community, and it's conservation groups like Palmer Land Trust and the Trust for Public Land, again, who we are partnering with in the Nature Conservancy, all trying to create a future for this property. And this working group, the Banning Lewis Range Collaborative, is really advanced 4 objectives. One is to facilitate a globally significant conservation effort. And as many of you know, there's a lot of significance to different portions of the property. One that is particularly significant is the area between Corral Bluffs here in Jimmy Camp and this whole area in here, where we have one of the richest sources of paleontological resources in the world, where the KT boundary has one of its few really prime exposures. Down here we have Big blue stem prairie transition zone into other prairie habitats in the shortgrass prairie ecosystem, important riparian corridors, just a very neat property. So one objective is a conservation effort that's globally significant. Another is to support Colorado Springs' leading economic drivers, which are tourism and defense, and also ensure that the protection of this property can make certain that the long-term viability of our military installations, in particular Peterson Air Force Base here. We think, given the opportunities that are present here along Colorado Springs' eastern border, that there's opportunities for development that really add long-term value retention into these communities on the east side of Colorado Springs. As a friend of ours in the group has said, we can't keep building 30-year product on the fringe. We're just going to be creating the next urban renewal area. But if we can build communities with long-term value retention in mind, again, that's going to make us a more wealthy and vibrant city. And then finally, by preserving major portions of this property, we encourage infill development. We have about as much open land in the city right now that we can develop on as we see out here. We encourage downtown vitality, and of course we keep our public services and facility infrastructure of a high quality and reduced cost. So we're excited about this. This is one of the things that we're working on. And I guess I should mention a little bit about the mechanisms that the collaboration is trying to advance, and there's really two that are worth mentioning tonight. One is that the collaboration itself forms a buyer group with interested parties and conservation buyers. The other is that we work with a potential buyer that shares this vision for conservation on the property and help facilitate an outcome that can work for them and for the vision that's being advanced here. So that's one exciting large landscape scale development that Palmer's working on. Here's a couple of images. This one's looking from Corral Bluffs out across the bluffs and then across the Banning Lewis landscape in the distance, and then eventually seeing, of course, our Front Range and Pikes Peak. Give you a sense of the scale of what we're looking at here. This is a little bit more intimate setting, thanks to Bill Kerner at the Trails and Open Space Coalition for these photos. Riparian areas, cottonwood bottomlands, just a really beautiful place. Okay, we're going to move south. As I had mentioned, yes, our trustees are nodding their heads because these are a couple of Palmer Land Trust trustees. As I had mentioned, the Banning Lewis Ranch is nearly contiguous with Chico Basin Ranch, which is nearly contiguous with our farm ground in the lower Arkansas Valley. These are two fourth-generation farmers who work in the Rocky Ford area. John Knapp, who is a Palmer Land trustee and a retired district conservationist with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and Mike Bartolo, who is the senior scientist and director of the Colorado State University Agricultural Resource Center in Rocky Ford. Many of you may know Mike because Mike helped develop the Moscow version of the Pueblo chili that is so famous in that area and draws 100,000 people to the Pueblo Chili Festival every year. This is where Mike and John work and live. Let me orient you to this map here. Here's Pueblo, here's Canyon City, here's the Arkansas River, and also the Highway 50 corridor coming through here. Here's Rocky Ford, where Palmer Land Trust just opened up its second office late last summer. And what this map highlights, a couple of things. One is it spans a very historically significant area. This is where the Santa Fe Trail came in. It's where settler culture arrived and then spread around the American West. It has some of the top producing agricultural counties in the state. Today, still, even after a lot of hardships over the last 10 to 20 years and a significant drought. And the colors on the map highlight, the green highlights farmland that is both prime and irrigated. Prime meaning it has, the soils have prime growing characteristics, and irrigated because we live in an arid climate here. we require additional irrigation water for those soils to be prime and productive. The brown on the map highlights farms that were once prime and irrigated, but that have been dried up. Part of the reason for this has to do with our great increasing water need in the state of Colorado. The Arkansas River is an over-appropriated system. That essentially means that there's no extra water in it available for new users. And that means that when one user group needs to acquire additional supplies, there's a couple of options. One is conservation, and we have a lot of conservation measures taking place these days to use less water. But the other is to acquire those supplies from an existing user. And what's happened here on these grounds is that the farms have been bought by municipalities up and down the Front Range, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Aurora, other smaller water districts. The water has been diverted from those farms further upstream to supply those cities, and this land is now fallow and dry. Well, what has transpired down here, as many of you know, is when farmland starts to dry up, you have a sort of cascading series of impacts on the community. You may not have enough critical mass of farms supplying packing sheds. You may have packing sheds closed down. You may have jobs, people laid off. There may be an equipment supplier on Main Street who doesn't have the critical mass to supply that equipment to. And then, farmers begin to wonder, well, things seem to be declining here. Is now the time to really make that investment in that additional piece of land or that equipment, that piece of equipment that I was going to buy? And some continue to sell off, and there's a sort of cascading cycle that I know many of us have talked about here. The thing that I like about our work now, working on protecting prime irrigated farms, I think one, there's two things. One is if you have a critical mass of farmland that is protected in perpetuity by conservation easements, think about what that does for the economy. All of a sudden, you have farmers on a protected landscape who know that this land is going to be here to produce for my family in the future. I can make that $250,000 investment in equipment right now. I can confidently hand this farm down to my children knowing that their future is secure. If you are an equipment supplier, you can establish a Main Street business knowing that your customer base is not going to disappear. A critical mass of protected agricultural land can really reverse the trend of agricultural decline, not just here, but across communities across the state. In this area, the other thing that we're doing is not only do the easements tie water to the land, but we're trying, as Kathy had mentioned, to work with partners like the Lower Arkansas Valley Water Conservancy District, Colorado Water Trust, to advance some innovative water sharing mechanisms where farmers protect the water on their land. They hang on to that water, it stays in the valley, but the easements provide temporary transfer mechanisms where they can fallow a field, rotationally fallow a field, let that field rest, pool that water supply in with other farmers, and use that as supplemental supplies for city. This lease, agricultural municipal lease, rotational fallowing mechanism. So some of you have heard about the super ditch. These kind of easements can provide water for that pilot project, which is another alternative to the buy and dry that we see here. So I'm pleased to announce, in terms of the update on this type of project, that we've just completed fundraising for 4 farms with very senior prime water rights in the Rocky Ford area, and are starting protection efforts there. So a lot of work to do down here, and we're really excited about the work that's taking place. Well, you know what I didn't mention here is, I'll just point this out real quickly. This shows in a more graphic way the different, whoops. I get confused between the changer and the laser pointer. You don't want to let things like that happen on a space shuttle mission, I'm sure. Here, there's not so many consequences. So here's our communities in the Lower Arkansas Valley, our farm communities. This is the amount of land, 100%, that was historically irrigated. This is actually a more conservative estimate than what's really happened with the buy and dry. But here's the land we've lost through the buy and dry. Here's what continues to be irrigated today. And as you see, especially getting down to Crowley County here, we've lost a good percentage of our prime irrigated farmland. Of course, switching to the other implement here. What we've seen happen is poverty rates have increased as this has taken place, and there's Crowley County there. So we have 2 counties in southeastern Colorado that today rank up among the nation's poorest counties with poverty rates in that bracket ranging from 32 to nearly 50%. So compare that to our adjacent county, El Paso County, and there's a big dynamic at play here that we need to address. So continuing south from the farm ground, you enter the shortgrass prairie. This is a beautiful photo from one of our supporters, Steve Weaver, very accomplished photographer, works at the geology department in Colorado College. This is what a resilient, healthy prairie landscape looks like. As you know, we've been facing drought in southeastern Colorado for the last 10 years. This is what it's looked like some days this last year. This is not a cloud, this is a huge dust storm moving in here across the landscape. We've had some dust storms on a scale that we haven't seen since the Great Dust Bowl. And, a resilient prairie landscape can really help protect against incidents like this. And, of course, this is the same landscape that we have a very robust ranching industry down there. And, of course, the cattlemen depend upon these healthy grasslands. In fact, we have ranchers in the rooms tonight, and I think some of them might call themselves grass. They manage grass health as much as cattle health. And so one of the things that we enjoy about our work down south here is the ability to partnership with ranchers to protect these large prairie landscapes here. And moving back to the last slide, the southeastern Colorado landscape, I've said this before to many people in the room, but this is one of the largest intact expanses of native prairie that we have left in the country. It's a really rich ecosystem. If you look at the land down here that's served by our Rocky Ford office, about 65% of it has high to outstanding biodiversity significance. Across the entire state, we have about 25%, only 25% of the lands fall into that category. So it's really a very rich landscape. We have one of the greatest diverse concentrations of native North American bird species on the entire continent in this area. We have the greatest diversity of reptile and amphibian species in the whole state down here. We have the largest complement of mammal species, large mammal species on the eastern plains. A very, very, very important place. Moving forward, this property is this is essentially the Banning Lewis of the city of Pueblo. How many of you remember a few years ago when there was a proposal to put in a nuclear power plant outside the city of Pueblo to the east? And it had moved through various stages of land use approval, and the final one had been scheduled. And, I think it was just a day or a few days before. Wayne or Jeannie, you might be able to help me out here, but we have the tragedy at Fukushima following the earthquake and the tsunami in Japan and the nuclear disaster there. And that put a halt on the land use approval, which is not a bad thing, because as you look at this map, here's our prime irrigated farm ground. This is the Avondale farm community. This is the Boone farm community. This is the Huerfano River here. This is the Arkansas here. So this is, essentially you can stand on this ranch, highlighted in green here. And this, by the way, is the BX Ranch. I said this was sort of the Banning Lewis of Pueblo. We call this the BX Ranch. You can stand here and look at the growth starting to occur out from the city here. And then you look this way, and the view is really unchanged from what the settlers coming in on the Santa Fe Trail would have seen 150 years ago. This is 25,000 acres, and it's important for all the reasons I just mentioned. The shortgrass prairie is important. Our ranching, our ecosystems, our economy, and I'm pleased to report tonight that we just last week finalized terms for a conservation easement acquisition with a conservation buyer that's going to protect that 25,000 acres in perpetuity. Perpetuity is forever. So that's a very exciting thing. So let's look at what that means for us from a landscape scale. Here's a map of the area we've just been looking at. Here's the city of Colorado Springs. The projects that are outlined in green right here are the projects that we're working on that we've been talking about. This is Banning Lewis Ranch. You can see it spans along the entire east side of the city. Here in blue is state land. That's Chico Basin Ranch, which runs all the way down here to the farm ground that we've been talking about. So a large contiguous landscape here. And I might just mention green here is what's been protected through largely private sector conservation efforts, the efforts of Palmer Land Trust, the Nature Conservancy, Colorado Open Lands. Those are the primary easement holders in this area. And then as we move down through the farm communities of Avondale and Boone, here's the BX, there's the city of Pueblo, there's state land. Here's more protected land on the red top, there's more state land. And you start to see that we're building just this large, open, wonderful landscape that we know is good from an ecological sense, we know it's good from an agricultural sense, we know it's good from an economic sense, and it's just a wonderful vision that the Palmer Land Trust is advancing right now. And I just want to say again, I'm just so pleased to have been a part of this organization for the last 7 years. It's been really wonderful. So that is the end of the update. I'm actually going to ask you to hold off on asking questions because I'd like to have Jeff's presentation first, and then we can open it up after that for questions for Jeff, and then we'll open it back up to questions for me, if that sounds fair. So thus endeth the annual meeting update. So I had the pleasure of meeting Jeff for the first time. I think it was a couple of years ago now, Jeff. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Jeff and then let Jeff work his magic up here. Jeff Ashby grew up in Evergreen, Colorado. He developed a love for the outdoors growing up there. Jeff has earned his Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering in 1976 from the University of Idaho, and his Master's degree in Aviation Systems from the University of Tennessee in 1993. He's a 1986 graduate of the Naval Fighter Weapons School, also known as Top Gun, and the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School. When he was a test pilot for the U.S. Navy, Jeff helped develop the FA-18 aircraft, and he's flown that aircraft in combat missions in Operation Desert Storm and Operation Continued Hope in Somalia. He was the Naval Attack Aviator of the Year in 1991, and he commanded the top FA-18 squadron in the Navy. He has accumulated over 7,000 flight hours and 1,000 carrier landings in his Navy career. Following that, Jeff reported to the Johnson Space Center for astronaut duties in 1995. He served as a pilot on the Space Shuttles Columbia and Endeavour, and as mission commander on the Space Shuttle Atlantis. He has traveled over 11 million miles, orbited the Earth 436 times, and logged over 660 hours in space. We are very grateful to have Jeff among our advocates and supporters. Tonight he's here to talk about the overview effect and how it changes our perspective of life on Earth. Please help me welcome Jeff Ashby.